Hello everyone and welcome to the Hypothetical NRL, a podcast about the what ifs of rugby league history. What you're about to hear, and if you're watching the YouTube version see, is a mock draft for the 1998 season that I held a few weeks ago. Today, Monday the 19th of December in 1998, was the day that the NRL was formed. So in honour of that, we thought that we would do this draft and we would do something a little bit different than what actually happened in reality. So I'm just going to quickly explain what the premise of this is. Then I'm going to cut across to the draft night itself, and then after that draft night I'm just going to go through what sort of happened post-draft and team lists and things like that. So the most important thing is that what we have done is change the amount of teams. We've changed what's happened to a lot of these teams. In reality, what happened was some of the teams, as in like the Perth Reds and South Queensland Crushers and things like that, they all disappeared. And it was decided in that meeting that by the year 2000 that the NRL, which was the new entity they formed, would have 14 teams by the year 2000, and the way that they would achieve that would be by not forcing mergers but by encouraging mergers, and anyone who didn't make a set of criteria at the end of that period was going to be excluded, and that did happen to obviously South Sydney and Norths, and then subsequently once Norths were excluded they decided to merge with Manly to create the Northern Eagles. We're not going to force anyone to merge. What is going to happen is there is going to be 21 clubs in this draft. The reason there's 21 is because we have added the Melbourne Storm, which happened in 1998, but we have not gotten rid of some clubs. We have some of the out of Sydney clubs that had folded. Instead of folding them, we're going to merge some of them together in forced mergers, and we're going to basically have the Perth Reds and the Hunter Mariners being put together as the Perth Mariners. So both those will go together. All the resources of both and the teams of both will be pushed across to Perth. I believe they probably would, maybe they'd play Newcastle at Topper Stadium. I don't know, but we'll find out. We're going to do a draw in subsequent weeks and months, and we'll find out if that is what happens. The other one is going to be the Gold Coast Chargers are going to be forced to merge with the South Queensland Crushers to create the Gold Coast Crushers. So the Gold Coast gets another new identity, which is very interesting. But all of these things will happen, and all of the players and everything that is happening is based off that. So that makes us 21 clubs. Then by the end of 2000 we're still going to have the same thing. The NRL is still going to be 14 clubs in the year 2000, but instead of forcing mergers they're going to take the top 14 clubs based on a cumulative, and then the other 7 clubs that don't make it are going to end up being put into a second division along with Newtown and some Queensland Cup clubs to create a proper second division that maybe would have promotion relegation, or maybe would have on merit promotion as it happens. So it's not going to be the end for these clubs, and they could possibly come back into the NRL at some point in the future, but it's a different way that they could have done it, and that's what we're going to propose that it's going to happen after this draft, 2 years after this draft. But the reason why we're doing the draft is because I feel that it's unfair with the way that players were kind of grabbed and pushed in positions, and the way that everyone kind of didn't start a level playing field. We're going to say, well, look, Melbourne's coming in, let's have an expansion draft, but let's also have a little bit of realignment of players so that everyone gets a fair go, and they get 2 years. Everyone who gets drafted or retained by a club has a 2-year contract. And so basically we're not going to have any swapping of players from 98 to 99. The only thing that will happen is junior players coming up through systems will obviously join. So anyone who debuted in 99 is still going to go through that 99 season. My plan, and hopefully it works, is to use I had a 2010 draft, but my plan, the same thing. I had a what do you want to call it, like a score predictor, basically. So it's going to create the scores based on some randomization, but also based on ratings of the players. It worked quite well. 2010, we ended up with the teams at the top should be the teams at the top, so that kind of seems to work. And we're going to run that for 98 and then 99, and we're going to see what happens. I don't know how. It's a lot of work to do, so I don't want to commit to doing it right now, but I feel like that's probably what's going to end up happening. But going back to the draft, the most important thing to remember, because you're not going to really get that once I kick us across to the actual draft night, because we didn't go back through and explain it again, is that I gave every one of these guys, or gave every one of the teams, a list that had two different pools of players. The top pool had 13 players. Well, in most instances it had 13 players, apart from the merged teams, because I felt like that was a little bit unfair. I gave them a few more players to choose from, and they had to choose their top 4 from that 13. Then from the rest of their players they had left, they had to choose the other 9, which gives them 13 players to start the draft with. That's excluding Melbourne, obviously, because they don't have any players. So all the other teams start with 13. They get 7 draft picks. Melbourne gets 20 draft picks. The way the draft picks were organised is Melbourne gets pick 1, and they get 4 picks in the first round. I think it's 4 or 5, but basically they get picks in rounds 1 to 7, where they get, by the end of round 1, they should have, it's 5 in round 1. Every team should have 5 good players, 5 of the teams in their top pool, so they have 4 plus someone they've drafted. Melbourne gets 5 picks, and then from then on, it tries to balance it. I think it did pretty well, so hopefully everyone's pretty happy with that. Just the other thing is that we did have a few no-shows, which was unfortunate, but I'm trying to wrangle 21 people, so it's unfortunate. Some of them, or 2 of them in particular, didn't have anyone turn up, so I sort of helped draft for them. We tried to draft the best way we could. The other clubs, someone was a proxy, so there was some work commitments, there were some other things that unfortunately happened, and we ended up with some proxy people. So for instance, we have the Magpies and the Bulldogs will have the same person drafting, because our Bulldogs, Cliffy, is going to draft for both, because his mate couldn't turn up, unfortunately, for work commitments. Same thing with Sean and his friend, which is the Perth Mariners and the Raiders. That's unfortunate, didn't happen as well, but they all gave us lists of what they wanted drafted, and I think we pretty much drafted the best we could. So yeah, look, I hope you enjoy this. Once we get to the end of it, it's a very, very long part, so you probably have to do it in a few sections. But once we get to the end, it'll be me again talking to and give you some team lists. So if you are listening to it on the podcast version, I recommend, even if you listen to the podcast version all the way through, maybe flick across to the YouTube at the end if you want to, just to sort of see the names. I'll try my best to kind of say everyone's name, but in all the team lists, but I don't want to just read names after names, because we've got 21 by 30, so it's a lot of names to read out. I'll give you the team lists from 1 to 17 of their best team, and I might just point out some interesting players as well, rather than having to read everyone out. So if you do want to see the full team list, I will scroll down and show you. Otherwise, I'll probably put it up on Twitter or something anyway. So enjoy and what's about to happen. It does go for almost 3 hours, so it was a long draft night, but very interesting. We had drafting, we had trades as well. A couple of trades went through. One went through before we even started, and we had a bidding system which was hilariously chaotic, and then there was an auto fill, so there will be some players in the team list that weren't bidded for anything. It's just to get every team up to 30. So the way that worked was I used a randomizer to pick the top 20 players left based on their ratings, and once they were in a list. It also weighted it towards what kind of position these guys needed, and it sort of just selected players. I think it did a pretty good job. Did some hilarious things, so it's always good. All right, well, thank you very much and enjoy.